Welcome to LC Screen Talk. My name is Larry, and today we have another Pride series movie review in which we are discussing what keeps you alive. And as with all of my Pride series reviews, I'm joined by a special guest, and today I have the pleasure of being joined by Mikayla Daniels. Hi, Mikayla.
Hi, so glad to be here.
Thank you so much. Now, before we get into the film, why don't you introduce yourselves to everyone or introduce yourself to everyone and tell them a little bit about your background in film and all of that fun jazz.
I'm of course Mikayla Daniels. I'm a writer. I'm a filmmaker. I write and I host for a PBS series called KSPS Saturday Night Cinema, which is shown in several different states. I actually thought it was just shown here, and then I noticed it was being shown in other states and like in Calgary, Canada, and stuff too, which is
Oh,
really cool. But I have a background in both production and in screenwriting. So I have a graduate degree. I went to a very inclusive and forward-thinking graduate school called Stevens College MFA in screenwriting, and their whole mission is to amplify voices within film and television that aren't traditionally there. So it is very supportive. And that kind of got me into the whole screenwriting and film. And then, of course, I've been a horror fan since I was like a little kid. So horror genre is my favorite. And clearly, I mean, I dress in the horror genre, like I love it. So.
we also have an Emmy Award winner here on the channel today with Mikayla. So
Oh
thank you
yeah.
so much for
There's
coming
that. I forgot
on.
about that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just a little, a little thing. But thank you also for enduring this quick, shoddy blood makeup going
I love
on.
it.
It's like, you know what? Let's get into some sort of scary theme for right now. But
It's so when I saw you pop on with that, I was like, oh, that's like a person after my own heart. Like I absolutely love it. Thank you.
well, today we're talking about a film at first neither one of us thought we had seen, but it turns out Mikayla had seen it before. But it is a Canadian horror thriller written and directed by Colin Minahan, and it follows a young woman fighting for her life in the woods as her wife's murderous tendencies begin to surface. Now, this film actually premiered at the 2018 South by Southwest Film Festival and is now available to view on Netflix, at least here in the United States. So, what was your background with this film, Mikayla?
Okay, so like you said, when you initially brought it up, I was like, oh, that sounds cool. I haven't seen it. I'll watch it. Love watching films. I actually watch probably around 300 to 600 films a year. I do screen for film festivals and stuff like that. So I see a lot of content. So it wasn't until I started watching it, I was like, this is familiar. And I was like, and I was like, oh, wait, no, I have watched this. Like, I watched it a year ago. And so that's always not a super great sign when you don't remember that you've actually watched a film before.
So, we like to highlight several different genres, if possible, within queer cinema and films that highlight the LGBTQ experience from different perspectives. And before we came on camera, we started to talk about how queer cinema and horror have really intertwined for like ever, but it's starting to become much more forefront. We're getting films specifically centered around people who identify within the community, not, Nightmare on Elm Street 2 style, where it's the most obvious subtext maybe I've ever seen, but still subtext. How do you feel about the state of queerness in horror at large?
I mean, it's getting better. I mean, I think it's not where any of us want it to be. That of course starts with the script. I'm a screenwriter, so I do try to, even in my traditional drama films, try to have queer characters written in, because if you don't write them in there, producers aren't going to see that. I mean, like, you really have to put it in the script. We're nowhere near, obviously the amount of queer stories that can be told. But I mean, it's better than it used to be. Like you said, like, we're now having actual queer films that are just about people who happen to be queer and are in these circumstances, which I think really kind of describes this particular film that we're talking about. It's not about them being queer. They just happen to be queer people in these circumstances. And I do like movies like that because, we're just people. So like we would be in all these sort of different circumstances, right?
There are crazy people amongst us all in all of our subgroups. And there are victims in all of those subgroups as well. So, this film is also from the writer who did Spiral, which was another queer horror film, part of the like Get Out subgenre of films that has come since that film debuted, which I quite enjoyed overall. I thought maybe there were some aspects that could have been a little bit better, obviously, but I thought it was a pretty fun film. Did you see that one on
I actually,
Shudder?
I maybe I did. I mean, because I do have Shutter, so like I maybe saw that one, but I actually don't think I did.
Okay. And I
Pretty
know it was
certain.
it was confusing because we just had the new Jigsaw film that
Right.
released in May of this year
Yes.
called Spiral, and it was
Right.
supposed to come out last year. And then we had this
Right.
Shudder movie about this queer couple, also called
Yes.
Spiral. So it was a little bit confusing. But this is part of a tag team brother writer director duo, and he's kind of stepped out on his own a little bit. So, what are your general thoughts on this film?
Well, first of all, I do love the cinematography. I happen to be a person who really enjoys visuals, and I thought the location for the story was great. I mean, there's just nothing creepier than being out in the middle of nowhere, right?
Yeah.
That's actually kind of how I grew up. I grew up out in the middle
Oh,
of nowhere, and when you're so far away from people, it just automatically sort of adds this tension, right?
yeah.
So I think the location is great. I love again that the fact that these two characters just happen to be queer, that it wasn't really part of the story. It's just how their characters were. However, I do feel like this may be one of those cases where if it had been a woman writing it, we would have had a very different perspective. And I say this because as a pansexual woman, I've been in a relationship with men and women, right? The relationship between two women is very, very different. And there's a part of me that didn't feel like that was accurately captured in this film. Like it just didn't feel as authentic, I think, of what a relationship between two women often looks like, or feels like. Even maybe it's about the emotional feeling. He's definitely not one of those misogynistic writers,
Mhm.
because this wasn't a case of where they're very sexualized women. They
Yeah.
weren't. So he did a really good job in that. As a woman, I don't often see, especially in
Yeah.
horror genre, see these women characters. So Jules made a lot of decisions that like I was like, girl, come on, like for real. I have never met women who really panic as much. There was decisions that I felt were sort of weak decisions, that she was at times a very passive character. But there was one scene that I really enjoyed, the tension when she's being hunted in the woods, and like the wife is like really close by and she's like huddled down in sort of like that, almost that ditch. The way that it was edited and sort of the emotions, like it did, it got me.
Yeah.
And there was some great moments of tension in this script, but yeah, again, sometimes I was like,
Yeah, this was one where, as a horror fan, the character of Jules and even their neighbors really frustrated me. Just as a horror viewer, it's one of those final girls or those people, those prey people that you were just screaming like, do something, please. There's so many opportunities here, like anything, do anything. You know her plan. She has to make it look like an accident for her to like succeed in her idea. But what I did like about the film is kind of this sub layer of domestic abuse. And I thought that worked a little bit better than me viewing it just from that horror hunter prey perspective. It is kind of frustrating as an outsider, even when you're being mentally or physically abused by a partner and trying to build up to that moment of no or escapism or finally being done with it. And through that perspective, I kind of enjoyed that. But going in, I was expecting much more of a straightforward thriller that was
right.
like, Girl, please. I mean, especially like this year, this is a 3-year-old movie, so there's going to be spoilers. Sorry, so spoiler alert now. We're going to get into spoilers. But that moment when she drives back, I was flabbergasted. I was like, girl, you've made your decision. You just have to go to the police. Like, you just have to leave, give them a description, change the locks on the door because you're going to go back now.
Yeah.
She's gone.
Yeah.
Like, she's out of there. You didn't kill her when you had the chance. And then everything in the house, like when that final death, I also was a little bit, I was just like, oh my gosh, no, like even in her attack, she was so passive. And the part that I think is a writer's fault is the neighbors being that passive too.
Oh,
Is he made all of the victims that passive, and it makes it seem less intentional when it comes to that domestic abuse, because that neighbor girl, you already had the inkling she was crazy and she just did nothing.
oh yeah. I mean, that's a fabulous point. I think I had read that other people kind of looked at it through the sort of domestic abuse angle, and I get that, but I feel like if that's what they were going for, it wasn't set up correctly. That yes, we can choose to look at it through that lens, but I would have liked if it was an intentional thing on the writer's behalf, that it would have been set up a little bit more. But, you know, again, like you said, it wasn't just that character. It was like
Yeah.
everybody was just really passive. And again, it's one of those times where you're staring at the screen like, are people really this dumb? I mean, I guess they are.
Yeah.
But
That's kind of where I ended up at, was like, I liked this, but I thought, I think I'm projecting a little bit. I don't think it was intentional that the writer meant to put in this subtext, honestly, because it was too ingrained in the script. But what I did like was, one, we got two quite different depictions of a lesbian couple. It does still kind of have the mask femme look to it. I do also like, we flipped that to where the feminine looking or presenting girl was the hunter. The masculine one in their relationship was the helpless like damsel running through the woods. But I personally thought that Hannah Emily Anderson is her name was fabulous as Jackie, our antagonist. I thought she was really good. How'd you feel about the acting performances?
I actually really love that the performances.
Yeah.
I think for me, the only thing that really kept it from being like, I would kind of rate it like meh. Like, I mean, it's not horrible. Lord knows I have seen some horrible films, much worse than this. Like, I mean, I don't regret watching it. Again, it wasn't super memorable, so that's not like a great thing. But, you know, I wouldn't tell people not to watch it. It's at least fun. There's at least those moments of tension. And I think sometimes with horror, especially as fans, we tend to be a little bit more forgiving and be like, you know, like the story wasn't great, but you know what? I saw some fun kills.
In order to be a horror fan that watches a lot of them, you have to have that mindset a little bit, or you're not going to make it through the genre.
That's very true.
But I did appreciate, you mentioned the cinematography earlier. I did appreciate some of the interesting things he did, like that black light sequence was actually really cool. And we got moments with her as a killer that you don't get in a lot of these. They're just taken for granted. So her like scrubbing down with that black light to make sure everything was like blotted, I thought was a really fun moment. There were some moments that I thought were weird, like they came back around to that bird thing, but I thought the bird thing was a little bit strange. And the end was a little bit of a cop out.
Right. It was for real, just I didn't like it. I was disappointed.
I think the film has a great setup, actually. I think the
Yes.
first act is the strongest when we're kind of in this weird area. She's not really showing you signs, but like cracks from her past are coming up. Like she has a different name and everything. All the way up until we get to that push, that infamous push, I guess, of the film that sets everything into motion. I thought that was all the strongest aspect of the film. And then when it goes down the more typical thriller beats, that's where it gets a little bit more wonky for me. And I think it's because the characters make a lot of decisions. The final girl trope in horror is one that so many people love because you want to root for a resourceful underdog, basically, like somebody who's running for their lives, but they're not an idiot, you know? They're fighting, they're like active in the story. And that's where this one, I mean, I thought Jackie was a little bit more charismatic in her deadpan like deliveries to the camera. She was the most, obviously, because she's the hunter here, active person in the film. So you're kind of like, well, I don't totally blame you.
I mean, she was the better character. And
Yeah.
like, and sometimes we do see that the better character is the bad guy in horror, but generally that's like in a character film like Nightmare on Elm Street. When your antagonist is the more interesting character, maybe it would have been more interesting to tell the story from her perspective.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like when I was in grad school, that's what they told us. They said, "Are you sure you're telling the most interesting character story? Not who you think should be the protagonist, but who is the most interesting character in this story? And let's see the world from their point of view." Like that would have been super interesting to be able to see this, whole thing from her point of view, right? It would have been a very different film, but I think because she was much more of an active character, it might have been more fun.
Yeah, and it's funny you say that because actually, while I was watching it, there were a couple moments where I was like, this would be cooler if it was shot through the antagonist point of view. I think I actually completely agree. If this story had been told through her perspective, it would have been something a little bit more fresh, a little bit more fun, and really delivered something new.
Overall, again, it was okay. Props on the white dude writer for trying to put different characters and different stories out there. I mean, I appreciate when people try, but then I guess this is also a really good push to say, hey, let's hire
Yeah.
more queer writers. Let's hire writers who sort of live in these sort of situations and see what their stories are, because maybe they're going to feel a little more authentic, right? There's nothing like a lived experience to really bring a story to life.
Yeah, so as I was mentioning before, they're called the Vicious Brothers. They're a Canadian American filmmaking team. And Colin Minahan, I don't see much information about him. I'm wondering if he is queer or not. Because
He has a female
otherwise,
partner, which doesn't
okay,
mean that he's
no, it
straight,
doesn't. I just find
but
it a
he,
little bit strange then that his last two projects have both been LGBTQ horror films.
right.
That's a problem I think we have specifically with lesbian or
Yeah.
two female relationship films. Is last year I absolutely adored Portrait of a Lady on Fire, much different film to this, but I adored it. And it just sits in such strong contrast when you have a lesbian woman who wrote and directed that film, and it's sexual and it very, we get the nude shots and all of that you expect in a lot of LGBTQ stories, but you contrast that to something like Blue is the Warmest Color that is just complete just a world different, or even something like Disobedience, which has just come out. So many lesbian love stories have been told through the eyes of men, whether they be gay or not, or part of the community or not. There's just such a stark difference in how it's told. And I was certainly disappointed when I was looking up this film and kind of doing the search after we had decided on it and saying, oh, it is okay, it's a male writer director.
Yeah. And, I do kind of go back to that, I don't believe that men can't write female characters well, but there's the male gaze. And, again, regardless of his sexuality, he's a man telling a story about two women, about a woman on woman relationship that he knows nothing about. I get, he can't know anything about it. I'm a woman who's been in relationships with women. So of course I don't know everything, about it,
Yeah.
but I have a much better perspective than the dude does, right? So, again, we do need, definitely more women, more queer women. I'd love to see more Black trans queer writers. I just imagine some of these amazing stories that we're not getting. And, we need to encourage studios and films to, if they're going to be telling stories about women, like maybe consider having at least a woman producer, like somebody to tell you guys, this is like not how women behave.
And unfortunately, often it's not. And horror, again, is starting to open up in part thanks to stuff like Get Out and Jordan Peele being able to make these huge blockbusters where it comes to race, particularly Black Americans. But once again, unfortunately, we have those tropes in horror that go back forever of sassy comedic gay character getting killed off. We have random one Black person in the group getting killed off. Very rarely do they make it to the end or do anything in favor for our pretty white woman who's in a relationship with a pretty white man. He usually dies somewhere along the way, but she fights her way to the end one way or another.
He's usually like her reasoning too. Like a lot of times that's, it's like, oh, my love has died and now that's my motivation for the rest of the story. And I'm like that's never been my motivation for anything.
Yeah, and I guess that was refreshing here is the spouse is the hunter, so it's kind of they forced you into going and acting on their behalf, but we didn't have like mother storylines or the other horror or action hero most often is heroines fighting on behalf of their children, which of course is real to life as well. Mothers' experiences don't need to be negated. It's just nice to get those other. Yeah. So, any final thoughts on this film, particularly, or in general, on females and queers in the horror landscape?
No other final thoughts on this film because again, not super memorable. And then just, I guess my hope is unfortunately, we got to keep watching all the queer horror, whether it's super memorable or not, because if we don't watch it, they're not going to make anymore. And like, we need studios to understand that these are the things that we want to see, but also maybe hire queer writers for queer stories. Because, hey, we might know what we're talking about. And that's just sort of a general thing, I think, within the industry itself, totally, no matter, whether we're talking about, again, queer stories, Black stories, hire less straight white dudes, cis white dudes, and we'll have better stories, I think, out there in films.
And I think that's something that anyone from, a quote unquote marginalized group feels that pressure, certainly, of I have to watch everything that represents my group, whether it looks like something I'll enjoy or not, whether you also even feel that pressure of like, yeah, I didn't like that at all, but do I feel comfortable like posting on social media that it wasn't good? Because there's that unfortunate undue pressure put onto those groups of this might be it. If this
needs to be allowed to fail too.
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest thing is like, we need to be allowed to fail, whether it's having a film bomb, because that happens in the industry. And like a dude can go from Sundance to a Marvel movie and then his next feature bombs and he's still in the business, right? But if you're a woman, you're a Black man, you're queer, you might never get another chance again.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let us fail. Let
And
us make bad movies.
And that's why seeing something like this is kind of nice, because it's just a mid-tier thriller that you would see across the board that, like we said earlier, just focuses on a married couple in which one of them's a psycho and the other one's the victim. And it's kind of nice sometimes to just see yourself in that familiar genre that has long excluded you and not have it be all about coming out. Thank goodness we don't have another coming out story. Not every gay story needs to be about coming out and the hardships about that. And sometimes it's just nice to watch filler that has you in it and not make a big deal out of it. It's not your favorite. It's not bad. It's just something to pass the time with on Netflix. And I think that what keeps you alive kind of falls perfectly into that. Spiral does too over on Shudder, the other film from this director. But once again, thank you so much, Mikayla, for coming on, revisiting this film with me and talking about all of the issues we've discussed today. Do you want to let people know where they can find you, possibly what upcoming projects that they can support you in?
I'm on social media on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Pale Alaskan because I'm from Alaska and I am pale as hell. And I don't have anything that I'm working on that's mine. I'm actually going on set soon for somebody else's film. But if you follow me on social media, you'll see whatever I do. So.
Perfect. So, of course, those links will be in the description below. So make sure you go and show Mikayla some love. And if you did enjoy this video, hit that subscribe button down below and comment. Have you seen this film? What did you think? And what is your favorite horror or thriller with an LGBTQ plus character in the lead? Let us know either in the comment section down below, or as you heard, you can hit either one of us up on Twitter. I love you all so much for your continued support. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye.